Hi. Hello.
Hi, Itamora, you all right?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. It's nice to finally chat to you.
It's nice to meet as much in person as it is possible these days, it seems.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Thank you so much for getting back to me. Would you mind if I just read something, my friend?
No,
Um,
no, carry on.
so to everybody watching, hi. This is kind of the pilot episode, if you like, of I think we're going to call it Humanity Calling. And it's my effort, such as it is, to give you all, you lovely, extraordinary, everyday humans, a voice and to try and connect you with each other and bring you together the best that I can. So I'm delighted because people are already contacting and they're willing to share their stories, and I'm honored by that and humbled. So without further ado, I welcome Duncan Husband to our space. And Duncan, tell me, where in the world are you and what has the last 2 years meant for you?
Well, I'm based in Worcestershire, a little town called Evesham in the county of Worcestershire. Yeah, the
Which is
last two
England,
years
just in case anybody doesn't know.
in England. Yeah, of course you're in Scotland, aren't you?
Yes.
So,
Oh, I just mean, hopefully we'll get people listening from all around, and who knows
of
whether
course,
they'll be
yeah.
familiar. So, anyway, do carry on.
The last 2 years, yeah, it's been pretty hectic. It's been stressful. It's been exciting. It's been a lot of things. To be
Mhm,
honest, the
mhm,
last it's it's really pushed me to my limits in a lot of ways, and some of that is actually good ways rather than bad, because I think, especially sort of towards the end of August time in 2020,
mhm.
was when I really started to do things. I was campaigning against the masks because they came in England, I think, in at the end of July. And at the time, I didn't agree with them, but I wore one in the supermarket, and then I had a panic attack. Um, so I can't hear. Are you there? I can't hear
Yes,
your voice.
yes.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry. There we
Yeah.
go. I'll just speak closer. I don't have great audio, so I'll just speak closer.
Okay. Yeah, I was in a supermarket and I had a panic attack whilst wearing the mask, and I thought this can't be right. We can't keep doing this. So I went back home. I looked on the internet and found out you didn't have to wear them. So I thought, from that moment on, I started campaigning. I went on to Facebook, found a load of groups that were of the same mindset, and I started joining there and putting the rules out and saying, look, nobody has to wear one. We don't have to. Anybody has a valid excuse not to wear them.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
at the time, I didn't realize what the overall agenda was then. That was when it started, really, for me to sort of go down the rabbit hole. But I was creating leaflets and things like that to say, giving the list of the rules, giving links and things, posting them onto Facebook groups. Um, and then at that sort of point as well, I started doing freedom of information requests.
You did. I know
And
this,
you
but I'll
remember
let
those,
you.
don't you? I think that's when I got to sort of know you and a lot of other people within that sort of movement, really. And a lot of
You were a
those.
legend. Do you remember? Can you tell us what was the freedom of information request that really sort of it brought a lot of people together? Do you want to just elaborate on the one in particular that, well, I remember one in particular. Do you remember one in particular?
I've done so many. I've done well over 200 in the last 2 years. So
Okay, well, I'm trying to remember because I've seen a lot of things. I just remember you did a freedom of information request, and I can't remember what it elucidated, but I was just so grateful and so proud. I thought, yes, somebody out there has actually taken the time to do this and gotten the answer, and the answer illuminates things. Hey, it would be better if we could both remember what I was talking about,
yeah,
hey?
I mean, the one I remember most that I did was to do with the local hospital trusts in Worcestershire.
Mhm,
And that
mhm.
was to
What
find
was
out the
it?
amount of people that had died from, I
Mhm,
think it was from March 2020 up to December 2020.
mhm,
And it basically came back as saying that there was no deaths from COVID, all deaths were with COVID, meaning
mhm,
that they had underlying health conditions. And even the figures then weren't that high, really. And I think a lot of people passed those around because
They
I put
did.
them onto a local Facebook group, and they were passed around, and people were saying, look, there is no pandemic, and I think a lot of people at that time were sort of, like me, were using the Freedom of Information system to try and get data. And I think that was also a bad thing, because they started to clamp down on the amount of data they could give on various things. But yeah, it was enlightening for me, because it really opened my eyes to what was going on then, I think. Finding that there wasn't all these thousands of people dying. There were people dying, but it was probably no more than any other year. And if they did die with COVID, it was because they had underlying health conditions. And I think after that, I started looking at the statistics on the NHS website, and that was pretty much proving the same, that the people that were dying were really sort of elderly people and people with underlying conditions. There were very few healthy people, especially young people, dying from COVID alone.
Absolutely.
And it was quite shocking, actually. That was when things were talked about, like the vaccine passport, and all that sort of thing was starting to come in, and it was actually quite a frightening time, really, because a lot of us were waking up to what was really happening regards to Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 or whatever, and I think a lot of us actually went to some quite dark places during that time, because it was suddenly dawned on, certainly on me, that what the hell is going on here with this country, because this was something you'd expect from Russia during the Cold War, not from the UK or the rest of the world in 2021. So yeah, it was quite frightening at that time.
It was brutal. For those of us, and I was one like yourself, there are many, many people that we have both encountered, I'm sure, who were savvy to what was beginning to unfold long before it unfolded, not perhaps to COVID specifically, but they knew there was a plan, there was an agenda, and they knew what was going on as it was unfolding. But for some of us, this was our first real sort of wake-up call in the West, wasn't it?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the upside of it all was that I've met some amazing people, really. I mean, obviously, people like yourself on Facebook, but also for the Stand in the Parks that we did locally, and also for another sort of group of friends I've got, which we all came together because of this. So in that respect, I've met some fantastic people, most of whom we're still in contact with. So
it is. So there's this wonderful rising feeling of humanity sometimes, which combats the sinking feeling. But it's kind of that I want to give people the opportunity to talk about. So for instance, you say Stand in the Park, and I know what you're talking about because we're all in the UK. But for somebody who was listening from, say, Ottawa or somewhere in the States or Australia or anywhere in the world, you just explain what Stand in the Park is in the UK.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Stand in the Park actually originated in Australia. It was during their lockdown periods, and it was one bloke, I think, just because of what was happening during the lockdown. We weren't supposed to go out or anything. This guy in Australia just went out with a yellow T-shirt on, I think, and just stood in the park. And people were saying, coming up to him and saying, "What are you doing?" And then I think it originated there, but it's sort of spread to the rest of the world, really. And it was because obviously we weren't supposed to be meeting in parks or meeting in groups. Then people would meet together in protest, really, in a park, and it would just be a very social thing. So we'd all be I personally didn't wear yellow, and a lot of the people I know didn't, but the initial one was people meeting in a park wearing a yellow T-shirt or a yellow hat or a yellow coat or something, just so they could be recognized. And it was a good way of finding like-minded people, really.
And how do you find talking to people who are not like-minded, and do you do it at all?
I try not to.
Okay.
because it was difficult to start with because people just couldn't, a lot of people couldn't see what was going on, and they believed in the pandemic. And so I tend to avoid talking about it now. It's not worth trying to convert people.
And is that how you feel? Because presumably if we don't try to get people to understand, then we're sunk basically, to sort of abbreviate it, or perhaps you disagree. Sort of, how do you see that, what I've just said there?
I agree, I do agree, yeah, but I think after trying to explain to people and not actually getting anywhere, I've sort of given up trying, really.
It is very, very painful for people at the moment, I think,
Yeah.
to hold space around people that they love, or that they care for, or that they just encounter, who their views are so diametrically opposed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it's the fear of causing offense as well. I don't know, do you have that too? Or is it just, how do you feel about the fact that these people feel the way that they do?
Yeah, I suppose there is the fear of causing offence. I don't like to cause offence to people, but I think what some of the things that have happened, and people have been saying that, like the vaccine passports, were quite radical things. And if you just said that in 2020 to somebody, that there's going to be vaccine passports, people would say, no, don't be silly. And then, so the whole thing has been a very sort of, it's been very difficult to trying to explain that there's an agenda behind the whole thing to people. Because the way it's been done is that first it was a pandemic, then it was masks, social distancing, then vaccines, and people have seen that as being acceptable. And for me, for some reason, it's never seemed acceptable. I've never, even to start with, I thought there was something odd going on because of the way they were actually programming people. Because if you look at the first TV appearances that Boris Johnson was doing, there was 3 podiums, wasn't there? And then there was 3,
I didn't pay much attention, but carry on.
Yeah, there was three podiums, and there was 3 phrases, like, what was it? Save lives, save the NHS, stay safe, or something like that.
Okay.
So you had the rule of 3s. And before this came out, I was looking into esoteric knowledge, and the rule of 3 is quite important, as you will, if you know anything about Freemasonry, they use number 3, like 33-degree Freemason is the top level, I think. So the whole rule of 3s thing was sort of in my mind when this was happening. I thought, this is programming. There's something weird going on. And to try and explain that people were being programmed to people that sort of genuinely thought there was a pandemic, it was quite hard to do. It's a case of trying to tell them to turn off the telly and say, look, you're being programmed. This is all a big programming exercise, which is frightening enough when you realize what's going on. So it is difficult to try and tell people what you think's going on in a way that you try not to frighten them or to sort of make them think you're just a conspiracy theorist.
I mean, that has been such a label that people have had to sort of come to terms with. We all wear it if we dare to speak our truth to anybody other than those that have already seen it. It's a kind of, and did you see yourself before this? Did you ever get labeled as a conspiracy theorist before this?
No, I never. Even though I was looking into conspiracy theories, it was more of just, I wasn't really deep into the rabbit hole. It was sort of various different things, but I was not deep down any rabbit hole with it. But when this came along, it just, I was straight looking really into things and I spent so much time on the internet looking at figures and things like that. It was quite scary. Which was the other thing, is when you try to tell people who think it's all okay, that the way the figures were worked out, or the way the COVID deaths were worked out within 28 days of testing positive, You know, people
It
seem
was
to think that
actually 60 days at one point in England.
it was
It was 60, and it was just utterly bizarre, you know.
initially, actually, it was more than that. There was no cutoff point initially.
Oh,
So
really? I
that would have
didn't know
meant
that.
even somebody after 6 months who died in a car crash because they tested positive would have been a COVID death. But that was publicised actually by the BBC and the mainstream media. Surprise, surprise. And then Public Health England changed it to 28 days after that.
Okay.
But the 60 days is also used as well in another context. I can't remember how. So they use both of those figures, which even so is, you know, is fraudulent. And I spent a lot of time. Sorry.
No, please carry on.
I spent a lot of time trying to convince people that it's how fraudulent it was, because you wouldn't say to somebody who's had a car crash, oh, you died within 28 days of having a car crash. You would say, well, they died of injuries sustained during the car crash, but later on. So it's really hard to sort of justify how you can have 28 days after testing positive for a flu-like illness, that you can justify that as being a COVID death, and nothing else. It's just, you know, the whole thing was fraudulent from the start, and to try and persuade people otherwise was a difficult task.
And I mean, you're absolutely right. It's put everybody in a very difficult ethical and moral position, because if you don't talk about it, then it cannot be halted. But if you do talk about it, you run the risk of truly upsetting, you know, everybody that you speak to. Do you have family and friends who have, you said you have friends, but you've met them through the internet. Do you have people in your close sort of families or friend circle who agree with you, or are you on your own with this?
Initially I was on my own, but none of my family, they all fell for it. I mean, I was the only one in my family that thought the way I did. Luckily, I'd met people in real life because of this, and in 2020 we had a little group where we'd sort of met at a friend's place during lockdown. So we would meet up, and it would be like, it felt like a Lower Low. You know, remember the comedy A Lower Low, the Resistance, and that's what it felt like, to be honest, because we're all like-minded people, we're all fairly local, and we'd met up really because we got to know each other because of all this. So yeah, that was really good.
And I remember you commenting on something that I posted, something to the effect of, you know, saying, you know, you're very encouraging, and I appreciate that, of something that I had done, and saying that for you, though, that after doing all the freedom of information requests, and after trying so hard, and after going through the data, and after sharing everything that you could with people, that you just didn't know where to go next, and that you felt like you had sort of hit a slump with it all. Is that still the case, or?
I think so, because I don't think that people are willing to listen to it now. I mean, people have the data is out there. It's so blatantly obvious. If people haven't learned to look at it now, then I don't think there's any chance that they will really.
So looking forward, then, do you see us as, you know, is it, as far as you're concerned, have they won, basically? This is kind of signed, sealed, and delivered because nobody will pay attention to the truth, or do you see any sort of hope for the future?
I don't know really. I mean, that's the hardest part, is I don't know now. Initially, I thought that groups of people like us would be able to wake people up, but I think those who are awake now are awake, and those who aren't. And I think it's a case of never the twain shall meet, really, with all that.
And I've also seen, I don't know if you've come across it laterally, but I found it a little disheartening that there seems to be a lot of infighting, people sort of scrapping over, you know, whether certain news information is true or not true, and pulling each other up for,
you've got conspiracy theorists, or so-called, accusing conspiracy theorists
Yeah.
of, believing in
being-
conspiracy theories.
Yeah, exactly. It's ironic, isn't it, really, that the whole truth movement now has become really, there's a lot of untruths in it, I believe, now. And there's so many people trying to call each other out as shills and controlled opposition. I just think that sort of really goes against what we were supposed to be about. And it goes against the sort of, there probably are people out there that have got their own agenda, or maybe even are controlled. I don't know, and I don't really care. But you've just got to go with what you trust, haven't you? Really, you've got to go with your heart and believe what you believe. And if somebody is out there, you don't like them, you don't believe them, you don't follow them. It's as simple as that, because you waste energy on them by calling people out as shills or insulting people. You're just wasting your energy on that. And that could be put to something else, And I think we've got to learn to look after ourselves more now as well, because we've got to look after our own well-being, because all this sort of thing can get to you.
Of course it can. Of course it can. Have you felt sort of the personal, you said you had an anxiety attack originally with the mask.
Yeah.
Has that anxiety dogged you? Have you been able to shake it? How do you feel sort of inside yourself, having gone on this journey?
I feel a lot better now, actually. I feel a much better person than I was sort of 2 years ago. I think it's actually, it sounds bad, but in some ways it's been really good for me. It's forced me to face up to a lot of things, a lot of fears that I've had throughout my life. And I think it's forced me to, really. I've not had a lot of choice, but that's been a really good thing in that respect.
So when you say it's forced you to sort of face up to a lot of personal fears, do you feel like this is it because you feel validated by other people in your discernment? So for me, a lot of the problem was just literally the inconsistency in the government's requests of people, and I mean, some of them the obvious effort to subjugate people, but what was really there, from the very beginning, was just inconsistency. Everything was inconsistent, and when everything's inconsistent, it's not true. So do you feel like the inconsistencies, like being able to spot the inconsistency and having other people validate that helped you? Is that kind of what the aspect that you're talking about that sort of drove something positive for you?
I think so, but also it pushed me to do a lot of things, like the requests that I did that I would never have done otherwise. And I made some videos at one point last year, putting out information about all this on YouTube. And I've never done anything like that before. So yeah, it's forced me to do a lot of things that I should have done earlier, but never did, never got around to. So yeah, it has pushed me a lot in that respect.
And just before we go, because I want to keep the snippets sort of so that people can actually, access them in their real lives, because everybody has such busy lives. Everyone's trying to lead the life that they're living, as well as do what little they can, in this regard. When you see sort of, if you could sort of give a message to, all the other people who've been on the same journey that you've been on, or a similar journey, about, just some things, either a kernel of wisdom that you feel like you have acquired, or a little bit of guidance for the way forward, just anything. Is there something you'd like to say?
I think so. I think the main thing is to trust your heart. What if it feels wrong to you, then look into it, but don't just judge something on the surface, because otherwise you end up as the same as the people that believe in everything the media tells you. So don't trust the media, don't trust the alternative, but trust your heart, what you think is right, and look into it to make sure that you're getting the right information for yourself. It's so easy to sort of believe everything you hear on the alternative side, because it's not the mainstream. but then there's probably as many lies on the alternative side as there is in the mainstream. So
Mhm.
really just, trust yourself and look into it, and, keep looking into it until you're satisfied that you get the right answer.
Mhm. Mhm.
But also to be positive about things, and not to give up, even though the whole situation can get you down. Just to keep being positive and look after yourself, really, because that's the most important thing, isn't it?
But you know what? I think that was a beautiful start to this little gathering that I'm trying to convene.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. And a lovely way to end it. Yeah, people, please do look after yourselves. Duncan, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Um,
Thank you, Tamara.
and I'm absolutely certain that I will come across you online very soon, because we hang in the same groups, don't we?
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Yeah, and thank you for having me on your video anyway, Tamara. It's been a pleasure.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. My pleasure too, darling. Take care, okay?
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye
Bye.
bye.